this is Keith and you're watching Barbara's Auto Help. Today I'm going to be replacing the axle seals and bearings on my '04 Ford Ranger. Now, as you can see here, I've already got the wheels off the rear end of the vehicle. I've also got it jacked up. I have the jack stands up underneath it, and also the front tires are chalked up there in the front. And I also have the vehicle in neutral because we're going to need to be able to rotate that drive shaft in order to rotate the ring gear to do this. So first part, go ahead and remove the brake drum, and I'm going to replace the axle seals and bearings on both sides. You're only going to see me work on this side here, but the process is the same for the opposite side there. So now we're going to go up underneath the vehicle and take a look at the rear end and get to taking the pumpkin cover off. So we're up underneath the vehicle in the back here. This is the pumpkin cover that I was talking about there, or differential cover. Now it's fair to mention there are two different differentials. Actually, there might be three different differentials that will fit in the '04 Ford Ranger. Mine is a 7.5 inch ring gear. You may have an 8.8 inch ring gear. And knowing that information may help you when it comes to buying parts for your vehicle. So if you're not sure which one it is, you may want to call your dealership up with your vehicle identification number, speak to the parts department, and give them your vehicle identification number, and they would be able to tell you if it's a 8.8 or a 7.5. That's how I found out which one mine is. And there's also this little identification tag here too that a regular parts pro may be able to help you with at maybe an aftermarket parts store. That being said, we're going to go ahead and take this off. We're going to take all of these bolts out of the periphery of this cover here, and then we're going to pry our cover off, and be sure that you have a container up underneath to catch all the gear oil that comes out. So we have all of our bolts out, and we're just going to take a pry bar to the corner over here, and we're just going to pry out on it a little bit. And like I said, be sure you got something to catch this with, because you're going to make a mess. Okay, just pry it out a little bit more there, get it going real good. I'm going to put you down real quick, and then I'm going to peel this off the rest of the way, okay? We got our cover off, and this is our chunk right here. This is the ring gear. And, of course, you got your side gears and your spider gears right here. Now, you see right in there, that's the end of your axle. And on that side, that's the end of your other axle. Now, there is a C-clip up in there. I don't know if you can see that or not. I think you can. It's right up in there. It fits inside of the little groove on the inside or the end of that axle there, and that's what holds the axle in. That's why it doesn't just flop out. So what we got to do, we have to remove this shaft right here, and you look up here, you see you got this little bolt. It's an 8mm. We got to take that bolt out, and that way we can pull this shaft out. Then we can push our axle in just a bit on each side, pull the C-clip out, and then we can pull our axles out the whole way. So the reason we have it in neutral is so that you can do this. You grab your ring gear, and be careful, don't pinch yourself right up in here. It's very easy to do that, and it hurts so bad. But if you didn't have it in neutral, you wouldn't be able to rotate this ring gear. And the reason you want to rotate it, of course, is because you got to get this bolt out right here. So you got to get it accessed so that you can get a wrench on it or a socket on it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a socket wrench, put it on there, and take that bolt out. Now what you're going to find when you try to take this bolt out, the ring gear is going to want to spin on you. So in order to keep that from happening, what you can do is you can take a pry bar, and you can see on this side here you have these bolts, these bolt heads. You could take a pry bar, stick it right up in here like that, and hold it down this way, and that will keep this ring gear from rotating that way while you're applying torque to this bolt here. So I can't do that and hold the camera at the same time, but that's how you're going to keep this ring gear still. Whatever you do, don't damage the teeth on this right here. This is the reluctor for your wheel speed sensor back here. If you damage that, you're going to end up with the ABS code. So if you pry on anything or put the pry bar on anything, put it on one of these bolts right here, and do not damage that, okay? All right, so let me put you down, get that bolt out, and then we'll proceed. So I got my bolt loose, and I just want to bring your attention to this little dowel right here. You can see that there's a little piece looks like it's cut out of it, and that faces towards the ring gear. So when you put it back in, you want to make sure that it's facing the same way. Now let's take our lock pin out. We may have to rotate it a bit this way. There we go. You gotta get the right combination on it right there. And I'm just gonna sit this down in that pan so I don't lose it. You can see that this thing's trying to fall out on me. Something that I'm not used to. You see that you got that little sliver cut out right there. I'm trying to get this thing out and it won't come out like this, because up there, you see that? Let's see if I can get my, you got that little lip right there, and it hits on this ring gear right here. So what I discovered is that this thing spins inside there. So you can flip that flat piece towards either one of the axles there, and you see you got space right there. And once you get it like that, you can then take that axle and push it in just a little bit. So you see how I got the end of that axle pushed up against that dowel right there? You see the C-clip here. You can then move it out with either a magnet or a screwdriver or something. Try to pry this out just a little bit more. See how I'm working that out right there? So there you go. I got that C-clip out. You gotta, it's a little bit tight, but you gotta kind of get the opening away from you and have the closed in part coming out this way, and get you a screwdriver right in between there and just kind of pry it out like that, and it comes right out. Now you see that axle shaft there, we can then push it out. Now if you're doing the other side, you gotta do the same thing to the other side, and you gotta put that dowel back up through there, and of course flip that flat side towards this axle and do the same thing with that axle there. You can see I've got that dowel spun around the other way, and there's my other axle right there. I actually pushed that C-clip in through that way. You can see it's laying down right there, and then we're just going to take and push our axle in like that. Then we can go out and pull our axles out all the way. And sorry about this the shine that you see on this camera lens right here. I got some gear oil on it, so oops. And I want to give you a word of caution too, guys. Whenever you end up like this, and say this falls down a little bit, and then this spider gear up here is loose by itself, don't rotate your ring gear, because that could end up popping out, and it's a little bit of a pain in the butt to get it back in there, guys. So try to leave it as still as possible, or if you do rotate the ring gear, be sure that this dowel is up through both of the spider gears and also into the housing right here too. That way they don't walk out. So let's go ahead and pull this axle out over here. Pull it all the way out, and it's not a bad idea to get something up underneath this too to catch any grease that might fall out. Let's put that down right there, just like that. And I need to have something down there, some rags or something. But up here you can see this is the part that went through the chunk that circlip, or that C-clip was in right there. So that's what holds it in. Now something you want to be aware of, when you have an axle seal leak, you want to make sure that the mating surface, or where the axle rides on the bearing, is okay. And I'm going to clean this up a good bit here and get a better look at this, because you could have a spot worn down on this axle here, and if there's a spot worn down, that's going to create a little bit of up and down play, and it don't matter how many seals you put in there, if it's flopping around inside that hole right there, that thing's going to leak. And oh, by the way, before you actually take this apart, you shouldn't have a whole bunch of up and down play in that axle. So if you got like excessive play, and I don't have a specification for that, then you know that you got a problem in there. You need to investigate, of course, and check out what's going on your axle here. So I got it cleaned up a good bit there, and this image really doesn't do it justice. You can see this dull spot right here. This is where the bearing was riding, And I'm taking my fingernail to it, and I'm not really feeling any roughness right there. Even though it looks dull, it's very smooth, and I don't feel any resistance, or I'm not catching anything. And you can see that the surface is flat all the way across right here. What I've seen before is if a bearing starts to go bad, it will start to wear into this axle, and it will actually wear a groove or a ring all around this axle right here. And if that's the case, if this is not perfectly straight all the way across right there, and you got a groove worn in right there, this axle will have to be replaced. Or you can put a bearing repair kit in. And I've done that before. It's a special bearing that actually fits in there, and it has a seal built into it too. It pops right in there, and instead of the bearing riding right here on the axle, the bearing will maybe ride up here or back here instead, and it will ride on a different spot on the axle there and fix your problem for you. But the right way to fix it would be to replace the axle if that's worn down. And of course, it goes without saying, if your axle's junk, then your bearing needs to go too. Now, if your axle looks okay and you're replacing your seal, don't neglect to check the bearing for wear and tear, also pitting, things like that, scoring, whatever. Check that out too. And if you see damage on the bearing, go ahead and replace it. Now, I'm not having any issues with my bearings. I just want to go ahead and replace them. I'm in here. It's very easy to do, so I'm replacing my bearings with my seals. The problem I've got right here is that this seal is rock hard, or near about rock hard anyway, and it's just wore out. Time to replace that seal. So I'm going to take a rag to this, clean it up even better, get some of this gunk off right here. Before I put it in, I'm not going to have all this nastiness on there, and replace the bearings and reinstall it. So getting to this seal here in this bearing, I could very well use the special tool to take the bearing and the seal out at the same time. Just put it in here like this, tighten down your nut, and then proceed to use your slide hammer to pull the whole thing out. Now, if you're watching this video and you just want to find out how to replace just the seal, you can also use a seal puller just to remove the seal instead of removing the bearing with the seal. So I'm just going to show you how to do that. You just put it in there like this, give it a good yank. Easier said than done. And when you're doing this, you want to be careful just to grab the inside of the seal. Don't gouge the inside of the axle housing, because you want to be able to get a good seal on that, the new seal. And if it's got a big gouge in it, it may leak. So actually my seal puller wasn't working that well, so I'm just going to take a pry bar. It's got a broader end on it there that will grab more surface, and I'm going to work it out that way. Okay, so now that we got the seal out of the way, we're going to take our special tool here, and this tool attaches to a slide hammer. And if you don't own one of these, I'm sure you can probably rent one from a parts store. You just have to look around. Now, you see I got this head on here. The head is designed to slide in behind the bearing and then pull to like that, and it opens up, and then it grabs the back side of the bearing. That way you can use a slide hammer and just pull the whole thing out. So we're going to go ahead and put that in there like this. Now this part right here helps to keep that secure. You just tighten this nut down all the way, just like that, and it's good and tight. Then we're going to take our slide hammer, we're going to screw it into this end of it, and then we're going to yank the thing out. Alright, so our slide hammer is in place, it's screwed in all the way, and we're just going to hammer it out. Just like that. And this is the other end of that slide hammer there, and basically you just take this part of it and it slides back and forth on the shaft, and when it hits this knob right here, it gives it a good jolt in the opposite direction. So like I said, these can be rented from parts stores, so you don't have to go out and buy this. If you want to, that's great. However, if you don't want to spend that much money, just go ahead and rent it. So here's our new bearing. and we have to drive our new bearing into the axle housing there. Now, what I like to use bearing race installers, and you don't have to use that. You can use something else. But I just found out that this bearing race installer doesn't go up in that hole all the way, so I'm going to have to get creative. And oh, by the way, there is a handle to that bearing race installer. Looks like this right here, and you basically just put the bearing race installer up against the bearing, and then you beat this end right here into the housing, and that pushes the bearing in. Now, like I said, this is too big to go in, so what I'm going to have to do is put the bearing up in the hole to start out with, and we have our other bearing, our old bearing, and that mates up perfectly to the old bearing. Now, the name of the game here is to not damage this cage or the bearings inside. When you're driving this in, you want to put all the impact force on the outside edge here. That's able to withstand the blows that it takes to get the bearing in there. So we're going to put the old bearing up against it like that. Then I'm going to put my bearing race installer over that. Then I'm going to take my handle like so, and we're going to beat it in. Now, it will bottom out once it's in all the way, and it'll make kind of a different type of thud sound. So be waiting for that. When you hear that, just give it a couple more taps. Make sure it's in all the way. I don't know if you could tell the difference there or not. Also, when you're doing this, try to make sure that that bearing is perfectly centered on the old or the new bearing. That way you don't jack anything up. Now let me just back up here just to bring up a point. It appears that this race installer is actually bottoming out and hitting the axle housing instead of applying force to the old bearing. The old bearing actually is sticking out just a bit to where that's not happening. Now, if you start to bottom out on the axle housing instead of applying force to the old bearing, you may need to go with a smaller object that will actually just hit that old bearing so that you don't hit the axle housing and not be productive in what you're trying to do, which is to fully seat that new bearing there. And just some added information here, there's actually a little ridge that the new bearing bottoms out on. When you have the old bearing out and you're not installing the new bearing yet, just take a look inside that axle housing. You'll see it. It's a little rib where the axle tube becomes a little bit smaller in diameter than the outside area there where the bearing and the seal go. That's what you're trying to bottom out on. So you could actually even take a mirror and put it behind that new bearing once you got it installed and shine a light down in there and make sure that you're seated on that ridge all the way around. There we go. Now we're ready for our seal, and our seal goes in similarly. We're going to use the bearing race installer for the seal too, but before we do that, you want to make sure that the inside edge here is cleaned up from the last seal, and it may be a good idea to take like maybe a green scouring pad or something, what you use for cleaning your dishes with, and just kind of scuff it up inside there and get it nice and clean. Okay, I got all the old gunk off of the inside there where the old seal went up in there. Now you see here I got a little bit of rust right here. This is on the beveled part. This isn't actually going to seal anything. So we're going to go ahead and put our new seal in. Now what I would suggest when you're putting your new seal in, you can see you got this little spring in here that keeps this lip taut to the axle. You're going to have to bang this in, and there's a good chance that that spring could bounce out by being jarred into place there. So if you have some bearing grease, just kind of pack the inside here all the way around with some bearing grease, and that will help to keep that spring intact while you're beating it in. Also, when you use an object of some sort to beat this in, and I would always recommend using some kind of a metal that's softer than iron. That way you don't damage your surfaces or anything inside there, or there's less of a chance of you damaging something. So use something really soft to beat these things in there. But when you choose something, be sure it's bigger than that hole right there. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to beat that seal in until the seal is perfectly flush right here. And in order to achieve that, you'll need something that's flat with that. That way it doesn't go too far in. Alright, so let's go ahead and place our seal in the hole there. And this seal is a little bit different than the last one that came out. The last one had a lip on it that actually overhangs on this surface right here. I prefer to put seals in like that, but this is what I've got for this. So this is what we're going to use. Now, don't laugh at me. I left my hammer at work. I just got off of work and I'm kicking myself in my butt because I forgot my hammer. I'm going to use the part of my slide hammer to beat this in. I don't suggest using tools improperly like this, but hey, the show must go on, right? So let's go ahead and kind of tap it in there. And you want to try to beat it in evenly. If you feel one side go in more than the other, move to the opposite side and try to get it going in evenly, okay? There we go. That's nice and flush all the way around. And we're going to tap it one more time just to make sure. There we go. Now before you go to put your axle in, take you a little bit of your grease, or your gear oil, and lubricate the inside of this seal right here. Now if you're reusing your old axle, before you put it in, take something and kind of scuff up this area right here where the bearing rides, and also up here just outside of where the seal rides. I'd probably suggest something like some Scotch-Brite scouring pads. Those are the green scouring pads that you use for washing dishes. That'll take all the rust and stuff, or most of the rust off, and not damage the metal surface there. So just kind of lightly, just kind of run that pad along the outside edge here all the way around, and get that cleaned up really good before you slap it in there. Also, once you're done scuffing it up with the Scotch-Brite scouring pad, go ahead and spray some brake clean and get any foreign material off of this axle shaft. Okay, let's go ahead and put our axle back in. Now when we're putting it back in, be sure it's cleaned off, of course, as mentioned earlier, but be careful. Don't gouge your seal as you go in with it. Just kind of very gently put the shaft back in. Alright, once it gets to this point here, you kind of got to lift up on, or push down on this end to get it to go into the side gear properly. Work it back and forth like that. Alright, so that's in all the way, and at this point right here, just kind of push it in real good. That way you know it's in all the way. We're going to go back up underneath to where the pumpkin is, and we're going to put our C-clip back in and put our dowel back into place and cinch everything back up. Alright, so let me back up right here too. I'm being a little bit of a bad example here. I should have my other hand up underneath the axle and still supporting it in an upward direction while pushing down on the outer edge, or where the wheel mounts up to. Whenever you put this axle in, you want to do your best not to scrape that seal. So anything you can do to put that axle in dead on so that you're not scraping that seal surface, go ahead and do that. And usually having your left hand up underneath it, pushing it up while you're going down with your right hand, that will help you to kind of maneuver it a little bit without damaging that seal there. And I didn't do that, and I'm sorry. Also, whenever you put an axle in, we sprayed it off with some brake clean where the bearing rides and the seal sets. Before you put it in, take some clean gear oil and lubricate where that bearing rides and also where the seal sits before you put it in there. And also when you're putting it in, you may want to have a partner up underneath where the pumpkin is, and you need to manipulate that dowel so that you can push the axle in enough to where you can get the C-clip in. It's kind of hard to push that axle in at the same time and get that dowel positioned correctly so that you can get the axle in far enough for the C-clip. So have somebody push the axle, either push the axle in all the way for you, or have a buddy up underneath there manipulating that dowel. So you can see that I've got that axle in all the way. I got it pushed in all the way, and you see I got that dowel turned so that the axle actually goes in a little bit further so that we can get that C-clip in. And here's our C-clip. And what we're going to do is we're just going to slide that right up in here, just like so. You might have to work it a little bit, but it will go in. There we go. We got it pushed in all the way. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to push the axle away from that dowel, like so. See how that C-clip went in that little recess right there? See how the dowel kind of slid down there? Now that axle is in, now we have to secure our dowel back to our chunk. And as mentioned earlier, the other side is the same way. You just got to spin that dowel around so that you can push the other axle in all the way to get that C-clip in. But that's the gist of it. So now we're going to work on getting our dowel locked back into place. And you remember earlier that it was sitting like that. So we're going to put our lock pin back in and we're going to torque it down, and then we're going to move on. You probably noticed whenever you took your old lock pin out that there was a little bit of thread locker on the threads right here, and I'm sorry this isn't focusing for some reason. So when you put your lock pin back in, you may want to actually replace it. A lot of times some manuals will recommend replacing these. I'm not using a manual for this video, so I can't tell you that for sure, but I'm going to put some red thread locker on this. I'm actually going to clean it up first. You want to spray it down with some brake clean, get it nice and dry, and then also spray down your hole where the lock pin goes in, get it nice and dry. Then add you some thread locker to it. I'm going to be using the red thread locker. And then put your bolt back in and torque it down. Now, just as earlier when you were loosening it up, this is going to want to spin on you. So you could just take a pry bar up here this time, and you can lock this ring gear in place the same way you locked it in place using those bolt heads back there. So go ahead and put that back in. Be sure that your slit is facing the ring gear like it was earlier. Tighten that down and then move on. Now, word of caution to you, also, even going back to when you were taking that lock pin out, whenever you're using a wrench on this, if you're not using a socket wrench, use a 6-point box end wrench, because this pin is rather tight, and when you go 8 millimeters, it's really, especially if you got a 12-point box end, it's going to want to round those edges off on that bolt. So I would suggest a 6-point wrench if you have one. If not, 6-point socket. Now, if you use a 6-point socket with a ratchet, this might get in your way a little bit. In that case, you would have to take this out to gain access or gain room so that you can actually take it out and put it back in there. But I don't have the torque specifications for these, so if you do take them out, be sure you got a manual and you know what that torque spec is. And also, you notice this arrow right here. The arrow points out that way. The same thing on the other side. You got an arrow on that one too. But you don't want to flip this upside down or place this over there or anything like that. This is very critical that this is put back exactly the same way it came off, and that these two bolts are torqued down to specification. So we got our lock pin torqued down, and there is a torque specification on this. Like I said, I don't have it. I'm not actually using a manual doing this video here in this repair, so you'll need to verify that in your manual. And I use blue Loctite. Excuse me, I thought I had red, but I actually had blue. Now, at this point here, guys, we're pretty much just about ready to put our pumpkin cover back on, but we need to clean up our mating surface really well. And I like to take a razor blade and just scrape off any residual RTV and just crud and whatnot, and just get it really good and cleaned up, ready to receive the cover. Now, once you do your initial scrapes with your razor blade, there's still going to be some leftover RTV. You can take your green scouring pad, your Scotch-Brite scouring pad, and finish this up, kind of scuff it up really good. And then once you're done with your scouring pad, spray it down really good with some brake clean. and get it nice and dry, ready to receive RTV. Now, be sure don't get any of that crud up inside the housing right there. You don't want any debris or anything like that inside that housing. If you do get debris in the housing, be sure to get it out and maybe soak up that brake clean and whatnot with a rag. That way you don't contaminate your new fluid when you go to fill it back up with fluid. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera, and then we'll go ahead and put our pump cover back on just after that. So we're making progress. You see I got most of that RTV off. You want to continue to work on it, but you want it to look something like this all the way across, just plain metal. You want to get any kind of rust off or any kind of debris or residual RTV off. And then, like I said, spray it down with some brake clean, and be sure that it's not dribbling out right here. You need to have this whole metal surface perfectly dry and clear of any grease or oil, ready to receive the RTV. Alright, so I've got my new cover ready to be installed. As you can see, I've got RTV all the way around it. And this isn't the prettiest job that I've ever done. If you could do a little bit neater job, that would be great. But I'd say you want at least a 5mm bead of RTV around all the holes and along the sides here, like you see here. Well, not like you see here, but mine's kind of smeared on. But a 5mm bead should be sufficient, and just be sure to get all the way around each one of your bolt holes, as you see that I've got it here. Now, my bolts, what I like to do is I like to take a wire brush to the threads of the bolts and get them cleaned up really good. My bolts had looked like it had thread locker on them, so I put some blue thread locker back on there. And you may actually feel more comfortable just replacing the bolts. You can definitely do that, but I never do. I always reuse them. So I'm going to go ahead and set this thing in place and torque down my bolts, and then we'll get back to it. Alright, we got the cover on and all of our bolts are torqued down, and right off the bat I forgot to put the tag back on. So I'm going to take one of these bolts back out, put the tag back on it. You need to have that for future reference there. Now, I'm sure you're wondering why in the world you put a freaking chrome cover on your differential. It was the cheapest, believe it or not. I would have gone with a black one, but this was actually cheaper than the black one, and I'm a cheapskate, so that's why I went with it. No, I'm not trying to hot ride out my '04 Ford Ranger. That's just ridiculous, and I'm sure you guys, if you watch my videos, you've seen what condition this vehicle's in. It's all rusted out up underneath here, so yeah, no, that's not my goal, guys. Now, guys, I'm sure you figured this out. I replaced my cover because my old cover was rusted out pretty badly. Now, if you end up reusing your cover, you need to clean up the mating surface where the RTV goes, just like you did the mating surface on the rear end housing. So be sure both sides where that RTV seals up on the cover and on the housing are spick and span and nice and dry. Okay, then you can reseal it. Anyway, so we need to fill it up now, and I'm not sure if you know where the check plug is or not, so I'll show that to you, and that's where you want to fill it up at. All right, so this is the front of the differential right here, and you see you got your drive shaft going up to it from the front, and this is your check hole or your check plug right here, and it's got a 3/8 drive receptacle that you use a 3/8 drive ratchet on. Take the plug out and then fill it through that hole right there. Now you want to fill it until the level of the fluid is just at the bottom of that hole. It may even want to run out on you when it's filled up all the way. Now there's a method you can use to fill this up that I like to use, and you may appreciate it, so I'm going to go ahead and show you that. Okay, now this is the kind of setup I like to use. Your gear oil bottle should come with a cap that has like this little nipple on it. I just take a rubber hose, attach it to the nipple there, and what I'll do is I'll place the bottle upside down above the differential. I'll take the other end of the hose, place it into the fill hole, and squeeze the bottle and allow the fluid to drain out into the differential. Now, something that may speed things up for you, poke a little hole in the top here, and that will actually help the flow of the gear oil through that tube a little bit there for you, so that'll kind of speed things up. Not the fastest way to do it, but it's easy and simple. That's the way I like to do it. So once you're done filling up your rear end, of course, put the plug back in, the check plug back in, and tighten it up. Now, if your axle seal was leaking, like mine was right here, and your brake pads or shoes are soaked with gear oil, those shoes got to go. You got to change those shoes out. You're not going to be able to spray them off with brake clean and get all that oil out of them. These shoes are a little bit porous. The friction material is a little bit porous, and that oil has gotten into the shoe itself. So replace your shoes back here. Spray all the hardware down really well with some brake clean. If your brake drums need to be resurfaced, which if you're replacing your brake shoes, I would recommend resurfacing your drums. Be sure all the gear oil is off your drums also. Resurface them and finish up your brake job there. So that's it, guys. That's it for this video anyway. If you have any questions, please comment down below. I'll be happy to get back to you as soon as I can, if I can. Also, please read the entire description down below this video before you attempt this. I may need to clarify some things, and that's where I do that. And I'll also have a disclaimer at the very end of the description. So please read that. Very important that you do. And as always, please like and subscribe. Thanks again, guys. Appreciate you watching.